You see the headline, right? A stone quarry collapses. Workers are trapped. And then, just like that, the news cycle moves on. But what if this wasn't just another tragic accident? What if it was the completely predictable result of a broken system? Well, today we're going to take a much closer look at what really happened in Sonbhadra. So let's set the scene. We're in Obra, in the Sonbhadra district of Uttar Pradesh. This is where a stone quarry recently became the site of a truly devastating collapse. We're talking tons of rock and earth bearing nearly a dozen workers. And this one event, it really shines a massive spotlight on a much, much larger problem. And this is what it all boils down to. Was this an unavoidable act of nature, a freak accident? Or was this an accident that was just waiting to happen? As we're about to see, all the evidence points to this being anything but random. To really get what went wrong, first we've got to understand the place itself. Sonbhadra has this nickname, India's energy capital. But that title, well, it hides a really deep and troubling paradox. Okay, so here's what we know happened on the ground. A quarry wall just gives way. Workers are trapped, and the rescue effort scrambles to get started. An FIR, that's a first information report, was filed pretty quickly against the quarry owner for negligence. But as we're going to find out, just pointing the finger at one person completely misses the bigger picture here. And here's that paradox I was talking about. Sonbhadra is known as the energy capital. It's home to a massive 6,000 megawatts of power capacity. It's rich in the coal and stone that literally fuel the nation. But that wealth just doesn't seem to reach its own people. The region ranks incredibly low on human development indicators, which creates this stark contrast of massive industrial power right next to deep poverty. And boom, here it is, our first huge red flag about the system itself. In a district that is packed to the brim with high-risk operations like quarries and mines, the specialized disaster response team wasn't even based there. They had to travel all the way from Mirzapur, a neighboring district, losing absolutely precious time in those first critical moments right after the collapse. So yeah, this incident wasn't some random one-off event. It was a symptom of much bigger structural problems that have been plaguing this industry for years and years. This quote from the source material just hits the nail on the head. It is so easy to blame a single owner for cutting corners, right? But the real question is, who was supposed to be watching? Where was the oversight that should have stopped this before it even started? You have to understand, these stone quarries are often the lowest, least regulated part of the whole mining sector. They're usually run by small-time operators where the number one goal is cutting costs. And what does that mean? It means safety rules, worker training, even basic gear like helmets. Those are often the first things to go. Now, add in some serious allegations of illegal quarrying, and you have got a perfect recipe for disaster. The thing that's so frustrating here is that collapses like this are almost entirely preventable. There's a clear, established science to safe mining. The problem isn't that we don't know how to do it right. The problem is that the science is being totally ignored, and that ignorance costs lives. And this really gets to the core of it. On one side, you have this incredibly dangerous rule of thumb approach that's so common, just guessing how much explosive to use, making these super unstable vertical cuts. And on the other side, you have scientific mining. We're talking precise blasting, detailed geological surveys, and this absolutely critical technique called benching. So the first step in the scientific playbook is a microgeological study. Honestly, you can just think of it like an MRI for the hillside. It maps out all the hidden weak spots, the fractures, the joints, which then lets you design a blasting plan that avoids triggering a huge slide. These studies are essential, but they're almost never done by the small contractors. And then there's the second critical technique, benching. So instead of carving out a steep, unstable cliff face, you cut the slope into a series of wide, horizontal steps. These benches do two really important things. They distribute the weight, which makes the whole slope more stable, and they act like barriers to catch any falling rocks, preventing a small slide from turning into a catastrophic collapse like the one in Obra. What's so important to get here is that benching isn't just a different way of digging. It's a complete engineering process. You have to analyze the geology, plan the cuts, execute them systematically, and constantly ensure stability. This is the difference between real science and just deadly guesswork. Okay, so if the science is so clear and the methods are well known, why are workers still dying? Well, the answer lies in this massive, massive gap between the rules on paper and the reality on the ground. I mean, the system is failing at every single level. Government oversight is weak, especially when it comes to these smaller operations. Enforcement of the safety codes that already exist is incredibly lax. And what's really tragic is that the national expertise to solve these problems, which exists at world-class places like IIT Donbad, it just isn't being used, all because of a simple lack of political will. But, just pointing out the problems isn't enough. The good news is that there are very clear, very actionable steps that can be taken right now to prevent the next Sonbhadra.
So here is a blueprint for prevention, and it's broken down into actionable timelines. In the short term, it's all about immediate response, setting up local emergency units right there in Sonbhadra, and doing urgent safety audits of every single active quarry. Then, in the medium term, we shift things from optional to mandatory, requiring scientific microstudies before any new lease is granted, and actually holding contractors accountable. And finally, the long-term goal is to build a smarter system, one that consistently uses our national experts, from places like IIT to guide policy and enforcement.
At the end of the day, the goal is pretty simple. It's about transforming a system that is currently running on pure luck and wishful thinking into one that's fundamentally based on science, engineering, and real accountability. And if you think I'm exaggerating about that luck part, listen to this. This comes from geologists who study the region. They say, and I quote, "It is just luck that there are not many more accidents." And that leaves us with one final, unavoidable question. When human lives are on the line, in a business that generates so much wealth for the country, should anyone's safety ever have to depend on luck?